for part 2 of 3 on business development for firms. Let's jump back in. Randall, when we work with clients, some of the themes that come up are, establishing those good habits and understanding of best practices on one hand, knowing, how to do and what to do, but also that accountability side, making sure that it's happening. So what are reasonable expectations for business development investments from staff at a firm? And what would holding them to account look like?
Isn't it funny, there's some benefits to fear. I'll just talk on that for a moment. If people know that they have to achieve fill in the blank, they will do everything in their power to move towards that particular goal. And so I guess it's not really fear. It's really more if somebody's got the incentive and if somebody knows that it's actually really important, right? Somebody whose utilization is instead of dropping, there's fear. They're going to be out on the street unless they sort of figure out how to turn this thing around, right? And that's kind of what happens in pretty much every firm. You've got to make sure that you can be economic in that particular role, doing your particular things. The real question that you asked was how do we hold accountable? And part of it is to say, okay, here's what the expectations are. This is kind of like, call it the annual kind of performance appraisal. Okay, here's your specific objectives and everything. And I think that part of what we can do is we can say it's not just the end result. I think to be a little bit more helpful, we could start to provide some objectives or, even if they're a little less formal, about some of the process involved, right? And I mentioned speaking before. I'll mention it again just now. So, if somebody, for example, is feels confident doing some public speaking, and they know what they're talking about, and just in terms of what the topic is, they know that there's some resonance with that particular topic, and they know that if they can speak to a group that includes prospective clients, it's highly credentializing, not just for themselves, but the firm as a whole. Okay, maybe some of the objectives, some of the intermediate objectives, I should say, can be with respect to how many speaking engagements per quarter, right? Or the number of people that get added onto the firm's or the individual person's list, or maybe it could be the number of meetings that come out of these, and just if that works for that particular somebody else, for example, not everyone's a speaker, okay? Somebody else might be a writer, okay, and they're involved in writing a definitive book in the country on the subject of such and such. Their business development objective might be a little bit different. For example, writing that particular book and sort of getting it out there, and that accrues the benefit of the firm as a whole, not just them as a particular creator. So having some things at the very high level, that's one part of it. The second part of it is to say, okay, let's make sure that if they're doing whatever it is that they're doing, that they're actually know how to do it, rather than this and figuring it out all over again. Because if you've got a whole bunch of associates, for example, just figuring things out in the same way, this is not effective. If you've got a whole bunch of partners just figuring things out all over again, perhaps there's some things that we can do to make them a little bit more effective in doing that. The networking example that I gave. And by the way, just since we were talking about networking before, here's the thing. It becomes so easy when you go to a particular event to make a beeline for all the people that you actually know, and because you want to refresh the relationship, and then you end up spending 10 or 15 minutes from them, and maybe they mentioned something about what you might be able to help them or something coming up, and that's great. You got something out of it. But I'd suggest this. Why don't you make a beeline to those people if that's your comfort zone? Have a quick conversation. Say, I'm so glad to see you. Love to have a quick Teams or Zoom coffee to catch up, to hear what's happening. And they'll probably say yes, because you got the relationship, right? But then go over to others and then actually meet with them. And the more you ask questions that are open-ended questions about their business, about their challenges, about everything, the more you're going to learn. The more you talk about yourself, the less you're going to learn about somebody else, right? And so once you actually get to know them, okay, by asking them questions, and for those who are a little less comfortable networking, this is a great way because people that you meet think you're very intelligent because you ask great questions. Well, here's another trick. The goal of these things is not to find business, although that will come. The goal is to build relationships, to get those new zip codes. And your goal is to find out what's of interest to them and what their general challenges are, and maybe make an introduction to somebody else, right? And that somebody else could be one of your partners, or it could be somebody else in the firm, or maybe there's something else. But you want to afterwards, you want to send them something, a quick email saying, "Really enjoyed the time. Wonderful meeting you. Okay, in your conversation, you mentioned such and such. Don't know if you knew, but my firm puts out a newsletter on such and such. Just last month, there was an article on it. Thought you'd find it interesting." That's it. And then thank you very much. A few months later, you reach out again. Hope all is well. And you don't need to do this. If you've got an assistant, they could do this on your behalf, or an associate, they could do this on your behalf. Okay, but this is the point of how relationships start to be built in a way that is a context of the business, but of their business. And of course, you're around for when they actually need something.
Randall, we talked about shaking the trees and going fishing for new business, but the best source of business is always to sell more to your existing clients who know and trust and love you, and to get those referrals from those clients. So talk to me about that stellar client experience and perhaps some areas that firms may be overlooking where they can put a little more care and emphasis for the client experience.
Yeah, so that is a great question, Rania. And the way I would say this, um, too often, um, senior folks in the firm, partners, overlook or wish that people, in the lower ranks who are actually doing a lot of the work, who may be interacting with the client, were more effective in quote business development. And those people who've got incredibly tight deadlines and utilization targets, et cetera, are clearly focused on achieving the goals, which are usually, meeting deadlines and utilization, billable hours that are set for them. So, how do you sort of crack that nut? Part of it is to help those realize that because they might be dealing directly with the client, they might be the only ones who are in the position of identifying potential issues or potential new work or potential, extensions of the work, um, that a partner may not see. And it's their responsibility to sort of put their hand up and say, "Hey, by the way, there may be something here." But unless those people know that that is also, on the docket, and that's also something that's important, it's less likely to happen. Of course, it does happen, right? Because, people aren't idiots. On the other hand, they need reminding. And they really got to realize that this is actually something that's very, very important. Actually, number two is what I just said. The issue of making sure everyone knows that they have a role in the business development process. Number one, without a question, period, is doing a stellar job. Okay, if you do a halfway job, um, you're not going to get referrals. Okay, you're not going to get more work from that particular client. At every single touch point, trust either goes up or trust goes down. Every single touch point. And if at every touch point of a particular engagement, now some things you lose the case. You come out on the wrong side. But at every touch point, has trust been growing or has trust been reducing? Okay, and you might think, well, it's just the person who's on the job, but it can be anything from the how somebody's treated by the receptionist when they come into the office to what an accounts receivable clerk when they're following up on a waylaid invoice or whatever. Every single touch point affects that. So of course the work has got to be absolutely stellar. Okay, if that's not there, nothing's going to happen. So assuming that's the case, that everything is stellar, there are some things that you can do. Um, you could do a postmortem after the engagement, right? And you could ask the question, how did we do? Is there anything that we could have done better, right? Is there anything that you think surprised you in a positive way and that we should be doing more of whenever we're working with you or other clients? Okay. Are there any other people that you think we should know, who should know about us? You know, we're busy, but we're always looking for more, right? So the postmortem is really, really important. And the reason, the second reason that postmortem is important is that any of the feedback, good and bad, okay, literally needs to be put in the file, the personnel file for all the people on the engagement. So when it comes to that annual performance appraisal, we're actually going to have a nice kind of um, series of bits of feedback that can inform, you know, how that person actually does. It also needs to be fed back to the marketing team and sometimes the HR team, sometimes the IT team, because you may, you know, how will they know? Okay, and unless somebody tells them about some things that were very effective or some things that were not effective at all, right? So those are some of the elements that I think answer your question. It's a good one.
When it comes to referral networks and referral, even formal partnerships, can you speak on the types of agreements you would recommend to have in place to solidify those relationships?
Funny partnership agreements. It's like it means so many different things. Let me actually go back and um, to your first question and the first the earlier question, which is, you know, building business with existing clients. And I think that sometimes what we do is we delegate that to other people. The marketing department is a huge one. Okay, and it goes something like this. Well, you know something, we're going to get all of our clients, we're going to put them on the mailing list and they're going to get our newsletter. Well, gee, you know something? We're going to have an event. We're going to put all of our clients, invite them to our event, right? And so those are some of the things that, for example, the marketing department is typically in charge of, right? But that is not something that's specific to that particular client. And it's not something very specifically that can be used to build a one-on-one relationship where you can discover, you know, what some of their needs are and so on and so forth. So, you know, if there's an event, of course, if you actually show up to the event and you actually meet with the client while you're there and you have the conversation, of course, that. But if we just always delegate this to somebody else, sometimes we forget about the role that we as individual partners would have to actually do some of the relationship building. And there's only so much time. So where do you actually spend that time? And this is, you know, the concept of saying, well, listen, in you know, the firm as a whole, that's one thing. But for me, myself, in my practice, who are the A clients? Who are the B clients? Who are the C clients? And the A clients are those ones that are that are the biggest, most important, most, you know, the people that do the most referrals, so people who give us the most work. And for them, getting more business from them typically means making sure that we don't take them for granted, and we give them the love that we need. And making sure that we're building, you know, broader, you know, relationships. And if we only work with them in one certain context, then perhaps we could, you know, there's other practices within the firm that might be able to give them other assistance, for example. So that's the A's. The C's, the ones that you want, and the B's are the ones that are less and less important. However, you know, the question is how do you move the C's to a B and B's to an A? And you know, part of that can help with some of the technology like marketing automation and CRM, et cetera. Some of it can be from, you know, the IT folks. Some of it can be um, excuse me, the from the marketing department in terms of some of their initiatives and programs to sort of you know, make it easier. And some of it needs to be the individual partner who says, okay, what more can we be doing on in this? You know, how do we demonstrate our thought leadership and my thought leadership? How do I sort of build that trusted advisor relationship and everything? So I just wanted to get that thought in. But to your question about, well, what kind of you know, how do we sort of get from other law firms, and not every firm has got everything. Well, the truth is that the biggest firms do have everything, right? And the big issue there is when a client comes up, a new client particularly, and the first thing that happens is that wonderful conflict check. And oh, we work for the other party, or there's a conflict one way or the other, and we've got to give the business somewhere else. And of course, you know, you can recommend other firms and other particular people that you trust in other firms, and eventually they'll also be referring back and forth and everything because there's this professional respect. So yeah, of course that's one part of it. For firms that are more focused, okay, it's the same thing about saying, okay, well, you know what, for if we do a particular type of law, maybe there's some other types of law that might be adjacent to what we're doing, but we don't want to be building a practice in that particular area. It's a question of saying, okay, who are our trusted potential partners so that we can be a little bit more than just informal in terms of trading referrals, and so that's the call it the informal network more than anything else. The bigger firms, it's not a formal thing. The smaller firms, it tends to be who do we know, who do we trust? They'll do a good job and everything. I think from when it comes to for international work, there's a different dimension. Certainly, years ago when I was at KPMG, the question of, well, how do we make sure that we get and then manage and deliver work that comes from other KPMG firms in different countries? And how do we give it, and how do we make sure that the standards and so on are so there was a fair amount of work dealing with the international network or multi-firm multi-city firms. That's another interesting one, depending on the partnership agreement and depending on the culture of the firm. Okay, it might be a very, very smooth process, or it might be one, if everyone's got literally their own little practice in different places and there's not as much cohesiveness or um, um, connection between the individual partners. It's the question of saying, okay, how do we make sure that we're truly operating as a national firm or perhaps a regional firm where we're able to, because we've got offices in different locations or different countries, we could deliver at a much higher and more effective level for a particular client. So that's another sort of angle of it that is interesting. And don't get me started about, gee, if you're working for a subsidiary, how do you swim upstream to the mothership? Or if you're working on the mothership, how do you guard against, okay, a smaller upstart firm nibbling away at a division? So that's a bit of a competitive analysis, and competitive strategy. So, it's interesting. Every single firm is different. I've never seen two firms that are the same. Never seen two, some are, eat what you kill versus, we're just one partnership. Some are very office centric, some are very practice centric. Some are very structured, okay, and some are very organic, if you will. Excuse me, the personalities are different. Gee, it's different in they Toronto versus Montreal, like there's versus West Coast versus in the United States, New York firms versus West Coast firms versus say Texas firms. Like there's a difference, culturally. There's a difference with respect to the individual personalities. Every firm has got a unique history. Every firm's got a slightly different take on the strategy to get wherever they want to go. Every firm has got different structure, different tech stack, different approach to marketing. How much of the marketing is involved in the biz dev? Every firm has got a different view on marketing technology. Sadly, it's a bit of a mess. But you know what? It's because every firm is different. There's no way that one particular approach to solving the business development challenge would work everywhere. It's got to be customized to the parameters of the particular firm.
Randall, you mentioned East Coast, West Coast, Texas, LA, all the different cultures that exist, and that's only within, the US. Let's talk about another business development strategy, expanding into new geographies. So post-COVID, where everyone is happy to take virtual meetings, how important is it to work on expanding into new geographies? How important is it to have local offices where people can come in and sit in the chairs and smell the office and shake hands with someone? Do clients prefer to work with professionals who are more culturally similar to them in a local office?
Oh my God, that's such a big question. First of all, let's just acknowledge, I've been sitting on corporate boards for many, many, many years. And I remember every single time there was a board resolution, I would get a courier package and I'd do a wet signature. We all come into an op, well, we'd sign the resolutions, etc. Um, um, Nowadays, that little DocuSign thing, oh my God, so much time is being saved. The idea of client meetings where people are coming into the office as opposed to just doing it on Teams or Zoom or whatever, vastly, vastly different. It's just so easy. And it's such a huge time. Same thing with certain types of professional development. We can do it asynchronously using video, or we can do it using Zoom, etc. But the whole question of, gee, do we go into more locations? Um, you know, People need to press the flesh, certainly from a business development perspective. People know people within their individual communities, right? So if you're a firm that's in call it the top six markets in the country, and you wanted to expand to market number seven, market number eight, you could either merge in a strong local firm, or you could, because they've got the relationships with the business decision makers that are there, or you can open up your own office there. But I don't think that saying, okay, we're going to have a bunch of virtual offices is the perfect way to go. Now, let me just argue against that for a moment. I know some immigration law firms, for example, that have got a virtual office, across the country. Okay, it helps to have the virtual office from an SEO, search engine optimization perspective, right? They will actually have somebody drive out to the various virtual offices that they actually have from time to time so they could meet. But not every firm is kind of like a retail, um, personal injury, or a retail immigration law firm, etc., where that kind of thing. Certainly for the medium, larger size firms, if you want to expand, you actually have to have people who've got the relationships in that particular locale. And it's very hard to do that virtually. It's very hard because you're enmeshed in the community, like the actual geography. We actually live in houses. We don't live in Teams or Zoom or whatever, right? I sort of say this jokingly, but a website never signed a contract. A real client, a real prospect with a pulse and who can look in your eyes. That's the kind of thing. So if you've got these relationships that have been built for years and years and years, it's a lot harder. Now, this is the business development side. The servicing side is a little bit different, right? We don't need to have everybody in one location to do the work, right? And we in another one of these sessions we talked about remote and work culture and all that kind of stuff. But from a business development perspective, um, you can commute in. If you happen to meet somebody who's in another city, of course you could service them outside. In the law firm world, there's the issue of are you licensed to actually be a lawyer in a particular jurisdiction? In the accounting world and consulting world, that's different, right? But certainly in the law firm world, you know you can't practice law in a province that you're not part of the bar association. So there's that angle as well.
Talk to me about volume pricing. Would you suggest that firms secure contracts or access to more clients by offering volume pricing?
This is a surprisingly narrow question, and I'll answer it this particular way. If you've got one of the big firms that just is focused on corporate commercial, for example, law, in that particular case, doing this kind of thing, makes no sense. That's just not their business. On the other hand, I worked with an American law firm, which was a little bit more focused on individual work, and they were making deals with affinity groups specifically to provide legal services to all of the affinity groups members. Okay, and the idea is that the idea was that the affinity group would, in this particular case, unions would negotiate into contracts that the employers would pay per person per month a certain amount of money for the service, and the law firm would get the service and provide on-demand legal advice. And whether it's unions or whether it's professional associations, there's a business for that. But not all law firms kind of have specialized or focused, say, on individual work, right? And so for those that do, this is an interesting angle for it. But for for the call it B2B focused firms, that's not where they want to go. Some there's a whole bunch of accounting firms that just live on doing personal taxes, and that's their business. And of course, they do other specials and everything, but they need to find ways to get more personal tax clients because that equals revenue. Okay, or certain small business tax, small business tax or small business advisory work, right? So for those, the idea of affinity arrangements, that makes perfect sense, right? On the other hand, anybody who's doing like a lot of um, corporate commercial or transactional, other types of transactional work, securities work, and everything, it's really a question of, okay, how do you build those relationships with investment bankers? How do you make or build relationships between accounting firms and law firms? Okay, how do you build relationships in ways that those referrals come in? Because it's a little bit more B2B. It depends on the firm, but it depends on the firm.
Randall, what kind of IP do you recommend that individual partners and the firm as a whole have on file? Like what kind of thought leadership needs to be fresh content versus evergreen content?
I think you almost answered the question in your question because it's very tempting to only put out IP that is the latest and greatest, right? And when you do that, it becomes very stale. But along the way, you develop this relationship of being at the forefront of knowledge, which in pretty much every accounting, consulting, law, for sure, you have got to have that reputation. But it gets stale very, very quickly. What I would say is this: there is a place in the pantheon of IP that you can create where there is something that is more evergreen. And so um, part of the question of credentializing yourself with prospective clients is helping educate the clients, okay, on a number of the rudiments. I'm a member of a group of business leaders, and we had a question about a lot of people asked some questions about IP. And so we said, well, let's bring a law firm in, and the law firm could make a presentation, and they'll probably get a chunk of business from it, by the way. But we met with what we met. I met with the lawyer that from one of the big firms, I should mention, and they said, of course, I speak on this all the time, and if I'd love to do it, and they're going to give us some IP beforehand so that the presentation isn't at the very basic level. And so that IP is educational IP that speaks about all the basics of trademarks and copyright and patents and so on, in a way that when he's in front of the group, he answers the question, so what? And so if you've got that, and pretty much every firm, as an example, has got a blog, okay, or a LinkedIn newsletter or some combination of them. What if, for example, you said, here are the 52 top questions the clients are asking when we're meeting with them. Okay, you've got a relationship. Okay, they're asking a question about it, and sometimes questions are two types: some very specific thing about whatever, or some more general. Well, the general stuff is the evergreen. So if you can come up with that list of 52 different topics, okay, effectively what you've got is 52 blog posts, 3 to 5 paragraphs, thoughtful blog posts, so that if people start reading that, when you're actually having a conversation about their very specific thing, you're not wasting as much time on the basics because you can actually provide that IP to them. Thank you very much. Let's fast forward 3 years. You now have 150 of these things. If you're clever about writing the 52 and then the next 52 and then the next 52, effectively you've got a book, right? It costs very little to self-publish a book, right? And that credentializes the firm as a whole, but also the individual authors of the book, which started as a blog. Thank you very much. Inside that book, there might be, 15 chapters. Each of those could be a white paper. Each one of those white papers can be a template for a presentation that the members of the firm deliver. right? And so this once again demonstrates that it's, yeah, partly marketing, but it's also partly the individual lawyer who's actually involved. Let's take it the next level. So you've got all of these things. What if you use marketing automation sequences to actually build out, call it a course, like a mini email course, where once a week you might drip out, one article to whoever signed up for it. So imagine now you're back at that networking event and somebody's talking about this particular IP issue, since I was talking about that. And you just sort of slip in, something. We've got a 10 session, 10-week course. Actually, it's just an email course. It's quick reads once a week. Take, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to read through it. If you want, I can make arrangements for you to get. There's no cost to it. We just have it in our firm. And then all of a sudden you've got people who are actually on this particular marketing automation sequence. And guess what? Number 11 on that 10-week sequence, or the 10-day sequence, is actually a task for a particular lawyer to call back and say, hey, what do you think? You went through this whole thing, or did you? Were there any questions? I'm wondering what was it that caused you to think about this? And these are the kinds of things where you start with one thing and then it sort of goes all the way through. And think about who this touches. There's some technology, there's some MarTech stuff. There's there's the marketing department, right? There's the individual lawyer who might have written these particular things. Excuse me. It's the business development training that so that people know that when they're actually out there that they've got these little tools and IP that they can use. And it's the same IP that's actually delivered in many different channels. I have no idea for our clients, and certainly for our clients' I have no idea how people would prefer to actually learn, or how to have their questions answered. I know that some people like something that's long form. That's the book. We know that some people want the conversation. That's wonderful. That's what the phone is for, or Teams, or Zoom. Some people want, the blog, right? Some people want the email. Some people want the tweet or the X, whatever it is. So there's different ways, but the actual work to actually get that IP, that happens once. And then it's leveraged across the firm, and it's leveraged across a number of different channels. And as I said before, every firm is different. So how much you turn the volume up in terms of your investment across all these things, it depends on your situation. But the problem has been solved before. It's not something that's rocket science. It's just that, it comes from multiple different angles. And that's where some of this marketing strategy alignment is just so important.
On that question, we're going to pause here. This part 2 of 3 of business development for firms. We'll pick up with more Q&A in part 3. But if anything we've talked about so far resonates with you, if you're curious about doing a retreat, business growth coaching, how to align your team, bringing us to speak at a conference, we'd be happy to speak with you. You can email us at info@randallcraig.com or book a call at www.randallcraig.net/30, and we'll see you back for part 3.